Welcome everyone to the Club Dub Football Podcast. It's time for the recap show. All the stories, action and misadventure from the weekend's games all crammed into one great bite-sized spectacle. The guys are ready, so let's jump right in.
Welcome to the Club Dub Football Podcast,
where the only question is,
does your team make it into the club?
Can he get in? No, he cannot!
So welcome back, gentlemen.
Hello.
Oh, Aldrin back. So you tag in as Phil tags out. It's a trio of us again this week. And hi, JB. And I don't know, how on earth are we going to fill, up to an hour of podcasting time when there's just so little going on in the NFL world?
Subject matter that we
if
could,
only,
chat over.
Content is a challenge for all podcasters, right? But if only we had something beyond, a couple of retirements to reference. And in a week with only 2 games to recap, it feels like there isn't an awful lot to get our teeth into. But maybe we're helped slightly by the retirement being, I was about to say, arguably the greatest NFL player of all time.
There's no argument.
Sure there's an argument. I was hearing that today. Roger Goodell said, Tom Brady retires as one of the greats. And I was immediately drawn to the words, one of. Who else have you got in that bracket? So we've got Tom Brady's retirement, which is bizarrely not related to why Phil is not here as our resident heartbroken Buccaneers fan. But Brady's retirement we will come to and give that the time it deserves. And then just before we started recording our Fair Pod, the topic of conversation was, are these the best playoffs ever? And my NFL fandom goes back to the 80s, so I can take it as far back as probably 85 at a push. And I think they've got to be mine. There were some really dramatic games in the history of NFL playoff football, of course. But as a collective, we've got to be here, haven't we? We've got to be in just one of the greatest postseason experiences I've ever enjoyed as a fan. And 2 games to get our teeth into that were just remarkable, incredible, lower scoring, but maybe even more entertaining than the games that have gone before. It all means so much, and amazing for fans of Cincy. They've got things to shout about for the first time in literally a generation or 2. So before we throw ourselves into that, let's play the music and let's do probably the briefest rundown of the season, or at least the second briefest rundown of the season. So let me tell you all in listener land that in the 2 championship games that we've enjoyed in the weekend just gone, the Cincinnati Bengals are champions of the AFC for the first time since the 1988 season. And you thought for a while they might be joined in the Super Bowl by the 49ers as they were for their last appearance, but the Bengals will instead be facing the Los Angeles Rams. So to give you the scores, it was Bengals 27, Chiefs 24 in a game that will be remembered for a whole host of things, but most remarkably, the huge turnaround in the second half. That play at the end of the first half that could have put the Chiefs, what would that have been, 27-3? I'm trying to think what that would have made it at the time.
If they got a touchdown.
Touchdown extra. Absolutely phenomenal game. We'll get into it in a minute. But the kick from McPherson, who really is just a rocket of a leg in the playoffs, it seems, means a 27-24 win for the Bengals in Arrowhead. And then the 49ers did everything I felt they needed to do. It was one of those low-scoring, tight, kind of really competitive games. The 49ers have found a real knack of winning through the playoffs, but this time the Rams were just too good in the final few minutes. Aaron Donald stepping up big, forcing an interception, and the Rams win 20-17 to join the Buccaneers from last season as only the second team in NFL history with a chance of winning the Super Bowl in their own stadium. So having not had it in the history of the National Football League, we could end up with it 2 years in a row. So 2 incredible games. Look, let's just throw over to you guys before we even get into the detail. What were your thoughts of the weekend overall? And feel free to reference your standouts. Aldrin, as you're back, we're back to tradition, right? You go first.
I really struggled to sum up the words to describe that kind of weekend of NFL ridiculousness. The Chief, do you know what? I don't want to do spoilers, but my predictions have been absolutely on point for the playoff games so far. And for a first half of the Chiefs game, I was sitting quite smugly thinking, do you know what? Nobody's catching the Chiefs now. The Bengals are out of this game. The Rams could comfortably roll over the 49ers and I'll be sweeping into a 12-0 prediction run. And then just like so many games this season, that second half of the Chiefs game just threw everything you know about the NFL out of the window. You know, it wasn't even like last year when the Chiefs had that really terrible Super Bowl against the Bucks, you know, and the whole game was a write-off. The Bucks were dominant throughout. The Chiefs never looked like they were in that game. And this time, Mahomes looked really good. You know, the playmakers looked really good. They had a nice balanced offense of run, tight end, wide receiver. Everybody was involved. The defense stepped up and was, you know, kind of doing what they needed to do to keep Joe Burrow under wraps. And you just thought, well, this is going one way. And then it just throws a complete 180. Mahomes' play falls off a cliff. None of the playmakers can catch the ball. The running game stops existing. And then the Chiefs go back to defending Jamar Chase like they did in the regular season. And I just thought, do you know what? That was an absolutely ridiculous game of football. I couldn't decide who to root for at any one moment, but I was on the edge of my seat. So I guess, I mean, that's the standout game for me. And it was just, I don't know, we talked a couple of weeks ago and you guys talked last week about what you thought might make the difference in that Chiefs game. And you all said, well, I hasten to say, JB, through bated breath, agreed, but wanted to make a prediction just so that he could be different. But I think we were all on the same page that the Chiefs' experience would win through. You know, Mahomes has been there and done it. Kelsey's been there and done it. This young, upcoming Cincinnati Bengals team was exciting, but might fall short in that kind of big game experience. And it was completely the opposite. I felt like the Bengals were just utterly fearless. And the Chiefs, I don't know, wilted under the pressure in that second half. And it wasn't even pressure that that was forced upon them. Do you know what I mean? They created pressure for themselves. And it was almost like, I know you referenced, Rob, and I'm conscious not to witter on, but you referenced that last play at the end of that first half and how that could have put them a million miles out of sight, let's say. And it was almost like the fact that they came away with nothing on that play. You know, they didn't get a touchdown, but also they mismanaged to clock to the point you couldn't kick a field goal and put it at 24-3 and then, you know, be even more convincing. Because they came away with nothing, it was almost like they went, oh no, we've left a window. The Bengals could get back in this. And then that premonition came true in the second half. It was a weird circumstance. Yeah, I just don't even know how to describe it any more than that. It's weird.
Well, obviously, we're going to talk about both games because we have to talk about both games. And to kind of just piggyback on how Aldrin started there, I have the words to describe this weekend, but unfortunately, as I don't believe Rob has a bleep function, I can't use those words because...
Non-broadcastable. Stay away.
And the of the points that I had to talk about, I've generated another two based on the ones what Aldrin has just mentioned there. So we'll go with those first because they're fresh in my mind. And I think, yeah, we talk at times on this podcast about those America's game moments, the moments you can imagine them sitting down and talking about, and that being the turning point of whatever it was. And that third down stand right at the end of the second was probably it, because that felt like it changed the game. But you could see after it happened, Mahomes go and signal for a timeout that the Chiefs didn't have. And the Chiefs didn't have that timeout because Andy Reid called a timeout earlier I think it was in the first, and then challenged a play.
Yeah.
And because he called the timeout first, although he won the challenge, I think, they still deducted the timeout because he'd already had it. And when we, like, obviously we weren't doing the podcast when the Chiefs won the Super Bowl, but one of the things we did talk about afterwards was how nice it was to see Andy Reid get over the hump and get that Super Bowl and cement himself in the discussion for great coaches of all time. And he did that by slaying the demon of what's always plagued him of can't really manage the clock well, can't really make those kinds of decisions at the right time. And it did feel a little bit like you regressed back to that. And it was that mistake that eventually led to, I don't want to say the Chiefs' downfall, but maybe contributed to them not performing as well. I think the other thing I'm thinking about, and I thought this on the day, was I don't think, to me, any one of those three Bengals wide receivers stood out as taking the game over. What you saw was there were thirds in that game. If that game was thirds, each third featured key contributions by one of those receivers. Earlier on, it was when the Bengals couldn't get going, it was those third down conversions to Tyler Boyd. And then in the middle, it was the Chiefs dropping the coverage on Chase and him being able to pick up yardage from there. And as I'm doing this, I cannot remember what the other guy's name is.
Higgins,
that was it. Hacksaw Higgins developed in the end, and it was because of his great play that they were able to get the points that they needed to go on from there. So it really felt like a team effort, and it started with that stoppage. And they're talking about the speech that, Joe Mixon's talking about, the mood in the locker room at halftime, and Joe Burrow's talking about all of that kind of stuff. Honestly, what it felt to me like was the defensive coordinator got in touch with Lemonade or Roman or Newman or something like that, because when that defense came out in the second half, it stiffened up a great deal. And that was it. It was just forcing Mahomes and the Chiefs into situations they didn't want to be. That strip sack that they recovered in the fourth, when the replay showed he could have thrown it to Kelsey or he could have thrown it to Pringle, both of whom were open in the end zone for a touchdown when they had to settle for the field goal, is one of those plays that, like, conceivably could be like the Malcolm Butler interception, which I think happened on this day in history today, as we're recording it, of key mistakes that just lead to everything. And then also keen not to continue to dominate the podcast conversation. I think to give listeners a peek into what it's like watching the NFL at Club Dub HQ, what you usually find is Phil is usually about 30 seconds ahead of us. So if anybody is looking at their phone at a time, you might have what's about to happen spoiled for you. As we were watching overtime and Phil, Rob and I were together, it was Aldrin's turn this week to play spoiler. However, all it was something like, wow, or oh my God, or something like that. And this was after those two passes from Mahomes that were surefire interceptions that got dropped. And Phil looked at that and his immediate response was, can you imagine he's dropped two and the third one's actually going to be picked off? And both Rob and I were like, absolutely not going to happen. This is going to be a 75-yard touchdown to Tyreek Hill, game over. Mahomes drops back, lofts it down, the ball's going to Tyreek Hill. Rob and I sat there absolutely convinced that we've got it right. And then it bounces off his hands straight to a Bengal. And we're just stunned there thinking, how was that just happened? Like, it was an unbelievable performance. Like, don't get me wrong, it was an unbelievable game. The Chiefs were so good. They dropped off at the end, but I think part of that was just because of the amazing comeback for the Bengals, and the Bengals absolutely deserved it. And I've gone, in kind of my closing point here, I've gone from Super Wildcard Weekend, where I think I said to you guys, I was personally offended by the state of some of the teams that were in that. Hello, New England Patriots. Hello, Philadelphia Eagles. Unfortunately, hello, Pittsburgh Steelers.
And Cardinals.
And Cardinals. To just sort of be sat here, I said to you, going, are these the best playoffs ever?
Well, the weird thing, I mean, I think your touchstones, I think I agree with. I think, and we've ended up kind of reviewing this game, haven't we? So rather than, I'm not even going to go near the 49ers Rams for a bit. Let's stick with this one then. I think I turned to you and Phil on Sunday, JB, when they kept the Chiefs out literally right at the end of the first half, and said to you, well, that completely changes that team talk. You know, that completely changes that locker room speech. And the thing that makes me think that locker room speech was incredible was that when you saw Joe Burrow and a few others, actually, to be fair, including Zach Taylor, you know, interviewed after the game, and they said, you know, what was said at halftime, they said, you know what, we've been a second half team all season. And the thing I loved about Joe Burrow saying it is you can imagine those are exactly the words that were said by the head coach at halftime. You can imagine that every player in that locker room bought into that idea. How true it is or not, I don't know. They've had some comebacks, certainly. I'm not sure points-wise whether they're particularly more prolific in the second half or not, but they all bought into that idea, if nothing else. And I think the weird thing about it is there was just that momentum, wasn't there? And, you know, it was a game that on the one hand could have really been changed by a big play, really either way in the second half. You know, the Chiefs could still have won and had their opportunities. But yes, there was the moment when Mahomes got sacked. A bit like, actually, it reminded me a bit of when Matt Ryan got sacked and it took, I think, the Falcons out of field goal range in that Super Bowl loss to the Patriots. It kind of had a bit of that feel about it. But actually, for all the big plays and for all those big moments, I just think the game plan in the first half for the Chiefs worked, and the game plan in the second half for the Bengals just worked. To your point, JB, I think Chase was important to all three of those guys because he occupied so many defenders. You know, when they really were focusing on keeping Chase quiet, it really did open up spaces for others. But, you know, one of the things that struck me is that when they were talking about McPherson coming out to kick the field goals. And I think the week before he'd been mic'd up and you hear him say, you know, we're going to the AFC Championship game, you know, before he's taking the kick. You watched him kick those field goals in the game at the weekend and you realize this is a guy who is fearless because he has no scars. And I just wonder, do the Chiefs have scars now? Do the Chiefs, after the Super Bowl last season and this game now? I mean, Aaron Rodgers has scars, you know, for how many times he's gone close but not come away with a Lombardi in a ring. I mean, you do just wonder, you know, is this game more seismic, you know, than the Chiefs not making a Super Bowl? Because Mahomes, you know, and the players they've got in that roster should keep them competitive for a good few years yet. But you just wonder, is the greater damage being done? Because that must just be, I mean, just an absolutely gutting loss. I mean, you know, the reality is they were absolutely on fire in the first half and could have scored, you know, with a bit better clock management, 28 points in the first half. And ultimately, even though they didn't, 7 points in the second half, just 7 points from an offense that loaded would have put that game to bed, you feel. But yet we were fed an absolute classic, weren't we? I think the coaching staff of the Bengals deserve credit. The players obviously deserve credit. But everything seemed to change. That defense, you know, was so different in the second half against the Chiefs, you know, and that just deserves, you know, a mention all of its own. As much as you can talk about Burrow, you know, and Chase and even Mixon and others, I just thought that defense in the second half were pretty remarkable, to be fair. Just incredibly entertaining, wasn't it?
Well, just to pick up a little bit on that kind of, you know, do the Chiefs have scars now and everything like that? Next Sunday's Super Bowl is the first Super Bowl since 2003 that doesn't include a combination of either Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, Ben Roethlisberger, and San Francisco. And when you consider the dominance that means for the AFC, I saw earlier on, like, Joe Burrow is only the sixth different quarterback to win the AFC championship since, like, roughly that kind of time as well. When you think about it, it's going to be Brady, Manning, Roethlisberger, Mahomes, Flacco, weird in that list, and now Burrow. Yeah. We have lived and we have been fans of such a dominant period of, I'm going to say two quarterbacks, really, of the utter dominance of one quarterback and kind of the guy who would be considered Brady if Brady wasn't there, I think, in Peyton Manning. So talking about, like, do the Chiefs have scars now? I don't necessarily know if it's that the Chiefs have scars now, or this is just kind of almost like a resetting of the Matrix. This is coming back to what should be the norm of the fact that, like, as we keep talking about, one team wins, 31 teams lose. In the conference talks, one team wins or two teams win and 15 teams don't win each side. So it's not necessarily, maybe from my point of view, that the Chiefs have got scars and this is going to hold them back. It's maybe just look how much talent there actually is at the top in that consideration. Because we talked about it last week, is Mahomes versus Allen going to be this generation's Manning Brady? And now we'll go, well, you could have that in any combination of Mahomes, Allen, Herbert, Burrow, Jackson. Let's put him in there as well. Plus whoever else is going to pull themselves up now as well. Because we talk about, this is Burrow's second season. So what amazing things are we going to see next year from the first year guys? Or what are we going to see in 2 years' time from the guys who are drafted this year?
There's still a long way to go for me to crown Trevor Lawrence the next Joe Burrow, but I didn't think Joe Burrow was the next Joe Burrow, or Josh Allen the next Josh Allen. So I see your point. I mean, we've certainly gone through a bit like men's tennis. You know, I was reminded really this week with Nadal. You know, it's incredible that he's won the Australian Open, but then he's one of those names you expect, don't you? You just associate him with winning, and you almost don't realise the magnitude of the achievement. And we've kind of had the same with the Mannings, the Bradys, the Rodgers of this league, you know, that have been this kind of generational group of quarterbacks that have carried franchises along. And it does feel like there's a bit of a changing of the guard, but I don't know. There's a debate as to whether the Bengals will be perennial performers now. I mean, I don't know. I mean, this came for me so out of nowhere. Yes, they've done better than we thought, but I mean, even so, the last 4 or 5 games of the season now in the playoffs are a complete kind of revelation to me, a complete revolution in the way you think about, you know, the whatever you call it, though, however you rank, you know, NFL teams. But I mean, it is just phenomenal what they've done to the Chiefs in Arrowhead as well, with all that noise. I mean, it just is a remarkable performance that you feel a franchise and a fan base kind of eventually deserved.
I think the one like takeaway you just mentioned about the noise there, one thing for me that did make me smile was the coin toss for overtime. And when the Chiefs won, the noise in the stadium, and I couldn't remember who the commentator was, but they said it's as if Mahomes has just thrown the game-winning touchdown when they got that coin toss, because everyone just assumed, well, Mahomes is going to march down the field and put it in the end zone.
It was Romo, wasn't it, who made the comment?
Yeah.
Romo was great on commentary, but there is a bit of, again, go to, I know JB's referenced the kind of things that have been reported at the moment, but also it took Patrick Mahomes 13 seconds to move the Chiefs into field goal range, and in overtime on Sunday, 13 seconds in, he threw the interception that handed the ball back to see. I mean, it's 0 to 0, isn't it? It's on any given Sunday, and all the things that bring us back for this game.
It also kills any of those discussions from last week of how we need to review overtime. Because last week everyone was like, oh, it's unfair that the Bills didn't get an opportunity at the ball. And with respects to the Bills fans, I mean, the Bengals did what the Bills didn't do. The Bengals took it away from them and said, okay, we haven't won the coin toss. We'll just take it instead.
Overtime, always for me. If you've got a complaint about overtime, win it in regulation.
I still think it'll be looked at. There's a bit of history here, isn't it, with the NFL? Do you remember when it was that awful no-call pass interference, wasn't it, against the Saints? And they looked at that then I can imagine they will look at overtime. But yeah, nothing to take away from the Bengals. Or actually the Bills, you know. I thought, you know, it's funny, we didn't end last week on who's the best team in the NFL. But I think bizarrely, even in defeat, I'd have probably still thought the Buffalo Bills were probably about as good as there is. So if we've rolled through, we were doing a recap of the week and we've ended up doing a recap of probably one of the most exciting games in, like I say, living memory. So it was well worth digging into Bengals against Chiefs. Let's throw it now into Rams 49ers. Another great game, but I said it at the top, I'm just so surprised that the 49ers made it just the kind of game the 49ers needed to make it. It felt perfect for the 49ers. It's what they'd done against the Cowboys. It's what they'd done against the Packers. It just felt like it was the 49ers kind of game. And then Cooper Kupp, has that type of performance. I mean, we shouldn't be surprised. And then secondly, it does make you think about, poor franchises like Detroit. What could the Lions have been if only they had a quarterback like Matthew Stafford? It does make you think about those guys in big moments who come up big, what could have been for fans in Detroit. But anyway, Aldrin, thoughts on Rams against 49ers, and then we'll get on to a little bit of what this means for the Super Bowl matchup. But yeah, Rams 49ers, where do you think this one ranks?
I mean, I thought that was a brilliant game as well. I know it wasn't quite as high octane, I guess, or as swings and roundabouts as the Bengals Chiefs game, but I just thought it was another absolutely barnstorming game where each team played to their strengths. I think, like you said, Rob, the 49ers created a game that was ideal for the 49ers. I thought they were, again, brilliantly creative getting Deebo Samuel involved. And that guy is just, I can't find any better words for that guy, because
utterly
he's
brilliant.
Good at everything. You put him at running back, he's an absolutely bulldozing running back. You put him as a wide receiver, he's a great receiver. I think one of the best players at the minute, if not the best, in open space. Just get the ball in his hands and see what he can do, because he is electric when he's on the ball. And to be honest, I think the Bengals did a little bit of that with Chase. When they couldn't necessarily get him going at wide receiver, they did some sweeps and they got him involved. Just get the ball in his hands and let him make a play. So, but yeah, I thought Samuel was great. I think, in truth, that 49ers O-line was really good against what was a phenomenally fearsome Rams pass rush, because the fact that Jimmy G wasn't on his backside the entire game was a miracle. And, you put that down to players like Trent Williams and others on that line that are just absolute behemoths. But that, for the Rams, I think the way they just kept bringing pressure, kept keeping Garoppolo on edge, not letting him settle, because for all that you can say about Garoppolo, when he has time to make plays, he can make plays. He's got electric receivers, great running backs, and with enough time and poise, he can create. You don't get to a championship game without having a quarterback that can create and generate good plays. But I think the fact that the Rams kept bringing that pressure right until the last moment, and obviously I know Donald takes all the plaudits for that, but that whole line is fearsome. I think Von Miller's resurgence is incredible. Floyd on the other side, I think, has flourished since Miller's come in, because, it's not easy, but, people were scheming against Donald and Floyd. Well, now you have to scheme against Donald and Floyd and Miller and others. It's almost impossible to stop. But I think the thing for me is that Cooper Kupp had a Cooper Kupp game. He was, over 120 yards, 2 touchdowns. The guy finds space. He finds the ball. And Stafford is a player that is not afraid to fling the ball his way, knowing that he's going to come down with it or make a play in open space or be a safe pair of hands getting towards the zone. I think the first touch he threw, where he found him right in the corner of the end zone over a corner and a safety, that was an incredible throw, but also an incredible play, a heads up play to know to get behind these guys and exploit where the space was. Odell Beckham Jr. looks brilliant again, doesn't he? I mean, I think his dad is probably celebrating with more YouTube videos of clip compilations of Matthew Stafford ready for next week. I think it was probably a game that both teams wanted to play. You know, how the game went and played out, I think both teams were comfortable with how it went, how the kind of game shaped up, and ultimately there just has to be one winner. And I think the Rams were good for it, if I'm honest. I think the 49ers gave them a heck of a game, heck of a game to keep it close. But yeah, I mean, Aaron Donald's a freight train. Try and stop that guy when it comes down to crunch moments.
Yeah, I agree with you in terms of the fact that I think this was the lesser of the two games. But only because...
Yeah, I mean, any team that comes back from a 21-point deficit or
but
18-point deficit is going to be like...
But no, 'cause honestly, I think this game would be even higher if this one had come first. If we'd have had the NFC Championship game first, we would be talking about what an amazing game that was and how close the Chiefs and the Bengals came to topping it. So it's literally... and. Like, when have we been in a position to say that about any championship games or any games in general, really? In dropping bombshell news, which I don't think I'd shared with anybody on the pod yet, I actually stayed up to watch this one as well. So I went to bed at 2:30 in the morning on Sunday, and I'm still suffering because of it, because I'm an idiot.
Nice
work.
Yeah,
I saw your WhatsApp messages late in the night. Yeah.
We were there.
But just thinking back to like what you were talking about in terms of Debo, and I thought this sort of Sunday night to myself. I remember, and I've had to look up who it was because I couldn't remember his name, Denard Robinson, who the Jaguars drafted in 2013, and his official designation was offensive weapon because he was a running back and he was a wide receiver and he was a returner and he was going to contribute in all ways of it. And it never really worked out like they wanted it to. Deebo Samuel is the dictionary definition of someone you would say is an offensive weapon, exactly like you said, because you get that guy the ball and he will do damage for you. Like the scariest moments like in the 49ers games have been those occasions when he's looked a bit dinged up, he's looked a bit damaged, and you kind of think, okay, with him out of it, you're calling on you've got a lot of expectation now on the rest of the team where he's a big contributor for it. But yeah, you kind of called it exactly right. This was a game where both teams did exactly what they needed to do to make it their own kind of game. And yeah, ultimately it was the Rams forcing Jimmy G into a situation where he made a really bad decision and he suffered from it. And you know, they showed the Fox guys showed him on the bench afterwards, and you could see it was the exact body language of a guy that's basically just saying, "Oh man, just let me have that back. Just can I mulligan that?"
Do you know what though? As much as you can malign Jimmy G, I don't think that was a terrible play. You know, they're third and 15. Yeah. You've got to try. You need a field goal. You've got time expiring on the clock. And to be fair, he got the ball to the receiver. The receiver just couldn't come down with it. You know, so I know that he'll want that back. But I think third and 15 against the Rams defensive front, you get the ball out of your hands and that's a play. Do you know what I mean? Like, I just think you can't begrudge in that.
I think again you've called the right thing with the Rams, and that punishing front is incredible. And you said your history dictates that you need to put 3 people on Aaron Donald in order to minimize, not even stop him, but minimize the impact that you can have, which is fine if, as we've talked about this season already, the Rams hadn't gone and got Von Miller and give him a bit of time and a little less pressure to get healthy, and all of a sudden he's looking a little bit like that old Von Miller, and you called out, oh, Leonard Floyd's here, so okay, we need to worry about getting the ball out quickly, but we can't worry about that too much because Jalen Ramsey's over there and he's going to pick people off, and we're a little bit doomed. I think the only thing that gave me pause and cause for concern is Rams didn't really put up a lot of points, and the Rams didn't really put up a lot of points on several occasions this season. And the last time the Rams got to the Super Bowl, that wondrous Sean McVay offense that we were expecting to see evaporated quicker than pouring out a Capri Sun on the sun. So I'm really interested to see how McVay responds from that, and if he can start to get creative with Cooper Kupp, who's playing better than any other wide receiver in the league, and an Odell Beckham Jr. that maybe is a bit happier. He's getting fed the ball a little bit more, and maybe they can be more creative.
I'll start with the 49ers, and I'll keep my points relatively brief because you guys have nailed them really. Garoppolo does not look good when you force him out of the pocket and you ask him to be more creative. And do you know what? On the one hand, I think Troy Aikman called it out a couple of times actually through the playoffs when he was covering 49ers games, that particularly when Garoppolo rolls out to his right, he tends to make bad throws. And he was lucky actually on Sunday not to be picked off probably once at least doing exactly that. But on the one hand, you say that and you go, you know what, undoubtedly a limitation of Garoppolo. But then on the other hand, you think, well, there are a lot of quarterbacks in that bracket, that when they're forced out of the pocket and when they put under pressure, they make mistakes. I mean, I don't think he's unique in that sense. But I think what we learned is Garoppolo is very good. I don't think he's elite. I'm not convinced Stafford is either, but more of that to come in a minute. But I think Garoppolo has had a really good playoffs, a really good season, and will be paid really good money to start for somebody next season if it isn't San Francisco. Now, the other thing I want to mention is, isn't it funny in the NFL when you have such big teams? I mean, most fans here in the UK would follow sports like, say, football, where you've got, 11 players on the field with a couple of substitutes. You've got ultimately 3 different phases of the game in American football. So although you'll have offense and defensive players on special teams, there could be, say, 35 active weekly contributors on an NFL roster. But yet every NFL team has superstars, right? Those names that you would know and you would recognize. And you think, what is it, that makes these guys the kind of talents and the kind of performers that get that level of attention? And Sunday's game told you everything you needed to know, because who had a big game? Well, Aaron Donald had a big game. Who had a big game? Cooper Kupp had a big game. Who had a big game? Well, Odell Beckham Jr. had a big game, and so on and so forth, right? When it really, really matters, these big name players have big, big games. And I just thought, you said it, Aldrin, I think Beckham looks brilliant at the moment as a number 2 receiver in LA. I think he looks fantastic. I think you've got Cooper Kupp, who is now for me probably the undisputed best wide receiver in the league. I don't think Chase is far behind actually, but I think they are certainly absolutely bona fide 2 of the top 5s and probably all pros for most fans' money. There is one point though, if I, talk about the Rams and the superstars they have that made the difference. I thought Bosa played well for the 49ers, another big name who they needed to have a big game, and he did. But to end your point on Deebo Samuel about him being an offensive weapon, is we've talked a lot through the playoffs and actually through the tail end of the season about situational football. And it's those people who understand situational football who can go on to win games. You were just referring to it, JB, with Andy Reid and managing the clock maybe. The thing about Deebo Samuel is there is no situation he doesn't fit into. You need 2 yards for a first down, Deebo Samuel. You've got a deep threat. Well, it's Deebo Samuel. You got a guy who's going to run over the middle, a guy who's going to take those slants, a guy who's going to take a sweep. He literally does it all. And I think that for me, we talked about, they've got a young quarterback coming in Trey Lance next season, most people believe. And you talk about, running back really supports a young quarterback. Tight end really supports a young quarterback. Well, they've already got a really good running back, a really good tight end. Kittle particularly, I think, is absolutely top draw. But I mean, Deebo Samuel for me could be a difference maker. Talk about a comfort blanket. Talk about being able to, work on things that a young quarterback feels comfortable with. I mean, Lance must be looking at that and can't wait, to get out of this redshirt season and have a proper camp, believing he's going to lead that team. But yeah, for me as a final point, you're absolutely right about the Rams laying an egg last time they were in the Super Bowl. They just seem different this time around, don't they? I think they've got, guys who are used to winning. guys who are used to the spotlight. And look, Matt Stafford hadn't won a playoff game coming in, and I'm not his biggest fan, but he's won some playoff games now, and to do what he did in the second half Sunday. It's funny because, you say the Rams didn't score a lot of points, JB, and you're absolutely right. But it didn't feel to me like the Rams played poorly, actually. I mean, I know Gay missed a field goal, didn't he, and a few, there's a few other elements. They could have had more on the board. But I don't feel like anything didn't work for the Rams or the 49ers. They were just both playing so hard, weren't they? I mean, there was receivers in that game countless times who caught the ball probably 3 yards from the line of scrimmage and yet dragged 3 defenders over the line to get a first down. And equally, there were times where a guy had catch the ball, 8 or 9 yards, and yet 3 defenders had swarm and stopped them getting to the marker. And I just felt it was high on quality, but it was also massively competitive. And it's funny. I mean, either team, make a play in the last 2 minutes in that game. I wouldn't have, as much as you're right, Aldrin, I think the Rams probably did just edge it. It's only a couple of plays difference in the end, wasn't it? And there could have been no argument for the 49ers if they'd have gone the other way, maybe. But yeah, 2 absolutely brilliant games. I wonder if the 49ers, and this is one for the offseason, do the 49ers think again, about moving on from Garoppolo? I don't think they do, but I think he had a much better playoffs. They collectively had a much better playoffs than I think people were expecting. And you do wonder, I mean, there'll be a tough meeting there, I suppose, before they finally shake his hand and wish him all the best as he heads to a new franchise. But yeah, well done, San Fran. And nearly another 49ers Bengals Super Bowl. So 2 amazing games, 2 games that just epitomize just how good the very best in the NFL are. More close games. We could go on. But if that rounds up our recap, for whatever time we have left recording our one pod this week with no games to predict this coming weekend, unless you fancy predicting the mockery that is the Pro Bowl. Should we talk about TB12? Over the weekend, we thought he'd retired. Then we were told quite quickly he hadn't. Today, we find out he definitely has. Adam Schefter's checked multiple times with multiple sources, and we're all now quite happy that Tom's moving on. I don't think there are enough words, but Aldrin, kick us off. What are your thoughts to the end, or what we at least think for now is the end? Maybe there's a Brett Favre moment in Tom Brady yet, but what we think at the moment is the end to the greatest NFL career there's ever been.
Well, I think that's it, isn't it? It is the greatest NFL career there's ever been. I don't think there is anybody that comes close to his level of achievement or performance in big games, or even overcoming that, he's only won because he was with Bill Belichick, blah, blah, that narrative. I think last year in Tampa Bay did wonders for that, and just showed that, if there's even any whisper of a question as to whether he's the greatest or not, he well and truly filed that into the trash. It's one of those, we had this discussion on Sunday night, kind of between us on WhatsApp, and we were talking around whether anybody predicted it. He's still playing at a really incredible level, taking a team that had to overcome its fair share of injuries and controversies, taking them into a playoff run and, narrowly coming up short, is not really the mark of somebody that isn't capable of playing at the NFL level anymore. But I always felt like Brady is one of those people that would go out on his terms. He was never going to suffer a down year. As the type of person and competitor and winner that he is, he was never going to let himself get to the point where, maybe you saw it with Manning a little bit towards the end, where he was hindering the team more than helping, perhaps, or he wasn't able to make all the plays that he wanted to. I never felt like that would be how Brady went out. I think Brady would want to go out at the top. Truthfully, I was kind of surprised he didn't retire last year. I thought like he might have gone into Tampa won the Super Bowl, ride off into the sunset and go, do you know what? Thanks for a career. I proved I can do it anywhere. I've nothing more to show, nothing more to prove. But he came back for another year and was still lights out. But maybe he felt like he wouldn't have been able to do that this forthcoming year. Maybe he just wants to go out on his terms and, do what he does best. And that's, make his own decisions and lead the way. So you can't begrudge him it. But yeah, I don't think there's any question that he's the greatest of all time. He's utterly peerless in that regard. I think nobody will ever come close to that.
So I spent a little bit of time talking about this in the office today and kind of said, I think for the last, what feels like 5 years, at the end of every Patriot season, it's always been, is this Brady going to call it time? Is this Brady's last season? And to me, this felt like the season where I wasn't asking that because I didn't expect that he would want to end it going out like he did. So I think this is a bit of a surprise, but you kind of can't begrudge a guy who's spent 22 seasons nearly, take out the first one, playing this game at the highest possible level with more success than potentially we're ever going to see. And kind of like I said when we were talking about the Chiefs and the Bengals game, this very much does feel like a once-in-a-lifetime talent, a once-in-a-lifetime thing that we're never going to see again. I haven't really got that much more I think I can add to Aldrin because I think Aldrin's put it really well there. I think the only things would probably be that I think the oft-used anecdote from Brett Favre's discussion about going into the Hall of Fame was the conversation took less than 10 seconds. You have to envision that the conversation about Tom Brady going into the Hall of Fame is going to take less than 5 seconds because you can't, even with the controversies that have surrounded his career at times, you absolutely cannot say that he doesn't belong in the Hall of Fame unless you want your Hall of Fame to be a bit of a joke. Hello, Baseball Hall of Fame. And the other thing that I saw that I did quite like were a couple of people who, I think someone tweeted it and it gathered a bit of traction in saying, McDaniels goes to the Raiders and then all of a sudden Brady sounds like he's retiring. What's the betting on Brady going to be Belichick's OC this season? And I'm looking at it thinking, that's pretty fun. It's not going to happen. Dear God, please don't let it happen.
I thought you were going to say Brady being a Raider. I'd have quite liked to have seen that in a weird kind of way. I mean, a few bits for me. What do you say about the guy who's had everything said about him through his career? Firstly, to your point, Aldrin, Tom Brady's best statistical year as a quarterback in the NFL. Any guesses?
This year?
Yeah. For most yardage, for yards per, this year is, now there's a few stats where his famed, it's always called the Randy Moss season, isn't it? For that one season, Randy Moss was catching passes where he was a bit higher in New England. But in the year just gone was his best statistical year. And you know what? There's one of those things where you just said it, JB. For me, the thing about Tom Brady is I don't think Tom Brady was necessarily a better quarterback than Aaron Rodgers or, all these people he would be compared to in these various kind of stages of his career. But what separated him was his heart, wasn't it? Just he is such a competitor. And in his statement today to say that he wasn't, feeling he was able to, give the commitment because of the ferocity that being an NFL player requires. And you think that's exactly how you see it. I think there are certain tandems in the NFL. You talk about triplets, don't you? Quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and there have been some great ones. But you look at Brady and you look at a guy who consistently not only got the best out of those around him, but I think expected the best out of those around him. And I think that's what made him unique, in the years where, what other quarterback would have, been able to do what he did in New England. And I love, Edelman, Amendola, there were some great players around him, but to really hit those kind of heights and all those championships, I just thought was just something else. And, it's really incredible to think that he did it. I don't know, you always talk about this. We were talking about that documentary, weren't we? The Brady Six the other day, for the 6 quarterbacks drafted before Tom Brady. But it was really interesting to read in the media reports today, when Tom Brady was first included in the computer game Madden 2001, his name wasn't included when he was on the field. If you played Tom Brady, rather than his name popping up, it just said QB12. And I just like that, for a guy with so little fuss and fanfare, so little expectation. I mean, he will be the greatest we ever see.
We've talked about this, like you and I talked about this recently off pod, when you were sort of telling me, and we watched a bit of that Brady Six documentary that got produced. Like, the question of, like, how can Brady do so well? How can he continue to push himself every season? And it's because he walks around still clinging to that kind of the belief and the expectation that people had of him then, still 22 years later. And going off on a bit of a tangent here, but one of the things that I think I really enjoyed about Chris Evans's performance as Captain America in the Marvel films is he gives you a wonderful sense of him still being the guy that's that scrawny little kid who wants to fight and he wants to stand up, but he just physically isn't able to do it. So even when he is big, strong Captain America, he's still got that sense of heart. And that's a little bit like what you've got with Brady. Brady has been more successful individually than any other player that we have ever seen. We keep talking about it. He's the GOAT. But I don't think he ever got out of that, was it 5th round mindset, whenever it was, like 199
Sixth
round, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, he never got out of that 6th round mindset of the fact that I think, and I have proven in college, that I am a really, really good football player. You have put those 6 jobbers, with apologies to Chad Pennington and the other 5 whose names I can't remember, ahead of me. You are all wrong. Like, there's that conversation he says he had, and Robert Kraft has kind of said, his first training camp, he kind of went up to Kraft and said, it was the best decision you ever made drafting me. That guy has had the motivation to do that from the very beginning. And I wish I had the same motivation to be as successful in my career.
Do you know, I think there's an element, and this isn't to take away from the career he has had or the player he has been, but there's an element of what I think comes with Tom Brady that I kind of talked about with the Bengals and that halftime talk and that belief. When you've got Tom Brady under center, you believe anything is possible. And he earned that. He built that reputation, developed that aura. And I think you mentioned it, Aldrin, that time in Tampa Bay cannot be underplayed, because he was a huge fan of Joe Montana growing up. There were season ticket holders at the 49ers as a family and so on. And Joe Montana went to the Kansas City Chiefs and was brilliant, but didn't quite do it again. Whereas the 49ers went on to win another Super Bowl with Steve Young. Joe Montana will be forever known as the guy who ultimately won his Super Bowls in San Francisco, but ended his career a Chief. I think Tom Brady leaves with such a different legacy. I mean, it's bizarre. And actually, maybe it's why Tampa Bay was such a great fit and such a great place for him to go. Because I think there is no argument at all to suggest that Tom Brady is probably the greatest quarterback in not only the history of the New England Patriots, but also the history of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I think in those 2 seasons, he has done something that no other quarterback in, I don't know, what is that color scheme nowadays? The red and gray. I mean, I want to call it the orange of Tampa Bay. But I mean, nobody has done it, and nobody may do it again for a very, very long time. The fact he doesn't want to come back definitely doesn't mean he couldn't have. And I think that was important for him. Do you know when people laughed at, was it the play when he tried to run in the Super Bowl against the Eagles? And people went, there's the 42-year-old Tom Brady, trying to... Do you know what? I think that chip on his shoulder, for all the various reasons, is just something that's unique about his makeup. And the game will not be the same. not be. And also I'll say this, I think he is such a transcendent talent, like a Michael Jordan type talent. I think if we go and watch NFL games, got at Wembley or Tottenham Stadium or in America, wherever we go for the rest of our lives, we will never, ever be in a stadium watching NFL football where there aren't people wearing Tom Brady jerseys. I think those will be just part of the fabric of the game for as long as there's people around to remember him.
I also, now that he's actually retired, it means I can't wait for the inevitable Netflix Last Dance of Tom Brady, because that is going to be ridiculous. If people thought Michael Jordan was the ultimate competitor, I think Tom Brady is equally up there in what he demands from his peers, his colleagues, everybody around him. So I think that would be a phenomenal watch.
You know what? That's actually a really good comparison, because it's that mindset, isn't it? It's that Michael Jordan in The Last Dance, when he talks about, you don't start replacing us. We've earned the right to defend our title. We've earned the right to go again. And you kind of feel like Brady felt like that when he left New England. It's like, what haven't I done? There isn't like a 4 and so many win season. I have absolutely taken us to the edge, if not to the big one, every single year. You know what? I'd love that. Let's hope somebody in Netflix is literally putting ink on paper as we speak.
Well, just to kind of pull a little bit back into what we just talked about, how much more interested would you be in a Last Dance for Brady after we've seen him celebrate a Super Bowl in Tampa by getting hammered, throwing the Lombardi trophy from one boat to another, and then have to be helped back to his car because he can't stand by himself, than if we'd got the Brady and the Patriots, who everybody thought was a bit dull?
Well, do you know what? The fact is that throughout his career, Brady has got younger looking and acted more cool.
Mm-hmm.
If you rewatch that combine where he runs the 40 in cargo shorts and tennis shoes and looks like a 40-year-old dad at whatchamacallem, the
Sports
the kids
day.
Sports days, when he just turns up in cargo pants and train, it's the weirdest thing. And then you see him at age 44 winning a Super Bowl on a yacht, throwing the Lombardi to his friends. He just regressed. I love it.
That's one of the nicest things I think about this entire Brady legacy. The fact that throughout all of this, we haven't had anybody who's shown that clip and then had them say, oh yeah, even back then we knew this was a guy who was going to be the greatest player ever and marry a supermodel. Because everybody knows that you would be lying out of your backside. Nobody thought after that run that kid was going to do anything. And now we're here. And if we bumped into Tom Brady, it would be like Wayne and Garth meeting Alice Cooper. We're not worthy.
The curious case of Tom Brady, an NFL career almost lived backwards, wasn't it? But absolutely incredible, remarkable. And like I say, I'm actually going to change one thing to round out. I just call Tom Brady the Michael Jordan of American football. I think everyone else comes say, let's forget the NFL. Let's talk about the greatest ever sportsmen and women in any discipline around the world. I think the best they've ever had would probably be, fortunate to be called the Tom Brady of their own sport, Michael Jordan included. So, Tom Brady, retires from the NFL after just, a career that is indescribable, as incredible as it was, unlikely, as brilliant as it was, frustrating for all of those fans of other teams who found ourselves second best to the Patriots for a long time and then the Bucks far too many times. But yeah, Tom Brady, the best to ever do it. And gents, I don't know, considering we've got one show this week, it feels like we have packed in an awful lot. By the time we get together next week, just to whet the appetite somewhat, we haven't got a lot of work to do. That pick'em show that we do each week? Well, next week, there's only one game to pick. You've got to pick one winner out of two, and you've had the whole season to take a look at what they're capable of. When we're here in a week's time, we'll be talking Super Bowl. I want to go LVI. Have I got those in the right order? Super Bowl LVI. From SoFi Stadium, the Rams against the Bengals. Cannot wait. Thank you, gentlemen, for your company. A stellar show. Let's come back and do it all again in 7 days.
Thanks, Rob.
Thanks a lot.
Remember to subscribe
and be cool. Tell your friends.